Over the years, I've grown fascinated with toy steam engines. So a couple years ago, I purchased a Jensen steam engine for my own kids. I've been using this little engine to experiment powering my electronic projects, but more on that in another video. More recently, my son has become interested in boats, so I've been curious about experimenting with steam-powered boats. So I checked online and was blown away by how expensive the cheapest of these kits can be. This one is offered here in the United States for about $170, and that doesn't even include the steam engine, which can add hundreds more to cost, assuming you can find one that will work with the model. As such, I started searching on eBay for used steamboats, and I came across this little gem. It looked interesting, but again, there's no way I could afford something like this. I was curious about this particular model since I'd never seen anything like it, and after a few hours of searching online, I came to the conclusion that this was likely a scratch-built model, or maybe a kit that someone added a steam engine to. Upon closer inspection, I recognized the steam engine as a Mamod SP2 first introduced in the 1980s, and that in fact it was probably something someone engineered on their own. The overall boat does look like something relatively easy to assemble. Given the photos included with the listing, I figured I should be able to reverse engineer this, or at least build something similar on my own at much lower cost. Of course, the first thing I'll need is a steam engine, and this Mamod SP2 is relatively powerful for its size and also has a small footprint, so it's a good candidate. And since someone appears to have already engineered this boat around this engine, I decided to make the SP2 my first purchase. Again, trying to find an inexpensive Mamod isn't easy, particularly a new one imported from England. But after a couple weeks of searching, I finally lucked out with this find. The seller noted that there was some issues with the sight glass, but at least it was within my budget for starting this project. Through the next few videos, I'll share what I learned trying to restore this little engine, and hope that those of you with more experience with these engines can give me a few pointers moving forward, either in building the boat or fixing some issues that I discovered in trying to restore the engine. So this particular engine looks like it hasn't been run much at all. The action on this flywheel is pretty smooth. One thing I did notice on the eBay listing, which I contacted the seller about, and which he was very honest about pointing out, is the sight glass appears to be damaged. Looks like maybe it was just run dry once and then never played with again, but there is a gap in the sight glass right there. The other thing I noticed is on the pressure relief valve, I noticed that there's a lot of what looks like scaling. So I'm going to have to figure out how to clean the scaling from the inside of this little steam engine, and also how to repair the sight glass on this. That's going to be interesting because it doesn't look like that sight glass can be removed with screws. Those look like rivets to me, so I'm going to have to figure out how to remove those rivets, which should be interesting. As far as replacements for the rivets, I did find some on eBay. I did look domestically here in the United States, and I couldn't find anybody who sold these, so I went ahead and purchased them from overseas. And fortunately, the seller did include some brief instructions on how to replace these rivets. This is really the only guidance I have. I wasn't able to find any videos or demonstrations on how to do this, but in any event, this is what I'll be using to replace these rivets. And I quickly found out that I also need a rivet gun to do this. So I did find one on Amazon that wasn't too pricey, and I made sure that I purchased one that came with metric fittings. So here's my first attempt at trying to remove these rivets. I'm using a 1/8 inch drill bit, and I'm just basically following the instructions that came with with those rivets that I purchased from overseas. And I'm going to speed it up a little bit. Okay, I'm going to take a look at what I'm doing here because this is really frightening for me. Okay, and just to be on the safe side, I'm going to go with a 7/64 size bit since I don't really know what I'm doing here. Okay, here goes. Oh, this is making me nervous. So I've drilled all the way through, and there's some material actually in the back of that thing that I can feel if I try taking this little file, pushing it in there, it stops. So I guess I could keep drilling through that just to see what would happen. I'm going to go with the 1/8 inch drill bit. Oh, look at that. Broke right through. And it's loose. So I feel good about this. Doesn't look like I damaged anything. And I should be able to duplicate this on the bottom. So I'm just going to go straight with the 1/8 on the bottom and do this over again and hopefully be able to take this off. I'm going to hold the boiler this time so I'm not stressing the firebox. Okay, that looks promising. So that came off without any damage. Looks like I definitely have some scaling on the inside of this thing though. All right, let's see if we can get that rivet out. Here goes. Yeah, it's much smaller than the hole. Oh, that was no fun. But it came out. And from what I can see, there's been no apparent damage from using a 1/8 inch bit. So for my friends here in the US, looks like that works out okay for drilling out these rivets. So I've set up a flashlight over the pressure relief valve access, or that little thread. And as you can see, that must be the leftovers from the rivet, but there appears to be a lot of scaling in there, so I can see that from the entrance too of the sight glass. So it looks like there was some hard water that was used in this little steam engine. Okay, so I took a minute to actually shake out what was inside the boiler from drilling out those rivets, and there they are, and you can see that there's like a lot of scaling. So yeah, that's something I'm going to have to work on. Okay, so this is the sight glass. This is going to be interesting because it looks like this thing is actually fused to the metal. So I have no idea how I'm going to get this removed. So my son's trying to use a razor blade to get under it and see if he can separate it from the metal without actually bending that tin, whatever metal that is. But it's not easy. It's on there pretty good. Okay, so upon closer inspection, what I realized was happening was the plastic was actually biting into the metal such that I couldn't really remove it. So I had to drill it out of that little hole, being very careful not to damage the metal, as careful as I could anyway. And that seemed to work, as you'll see in a second. Okay, so the next challenge I had was with respect to this little pressure relief valve. It was completely seized up, which probably explains how that sight glass blew. So I went ahead and I let it soak in some apple cider vinegar to see if I could break it up and then hit it with a toothbrush. And here she is, all cleaned up, and the action on this is really smooth now as a result of getting all that hard water precipitate out of there. And I made sure to rinse this really well to make sure that the acid doesn't eat away at the metal over time, but I think this will work. And just as I'd feared, there's that's where the copper tubing comes into the boiler. and you can see that it's pretty messed up. So I was able to punch through it pretty easily with a dental toothpick, so it just looked like it was superficial, but one thing I noticed is there's a lot of precipitate at the top of the boiler. And this makes sense because that mineralization comes out at higher temperatures in water, something I remember from chemistry way back when. So as this thing is boiling, all that steam basically deposits all that mineralization at the top of the boiler, because the bottom doesn't look quite as bad, although it's difficult for me to show you that here. So here's my son. He's going to help me pour this in here. Real slow, Joey.
You're pouring it all over my hand. Okay, let it go, because, yeah, it's gonna drain. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay, I know you poured it all over.
You turn that big flywheel, that big red wheel. You can see here that it's not, that's good. I want to see vinegar coming out. Okay, that's enough, that's enough. But I do want to see vinegar coming out of that little port, so that shows that it is working. Okay, enough. This is what the drainage from the boiler looks like. That's supposed to be a nice, clear, apple cider golden color, and you can see that it's not. And what worries me about it is it actually looks like it might have a little bit of metal in it, like it might be dissolving the metal. So the trade-off is a little bit of scaling versus attacking the integrity of the inside of this boiler. I think I'm just going to stick with a little bit of scaling for now and leave it as it is and not worry too much about it. So there's that port for the engine, and this is a better view of all the scaling that's in there. Well, I did manage to get a lot of it off. It's hard to show. Yeah, it'd be nice to have it nice and clean on the inside, but I don't know if it's worth it. I think it's okay the way it is. So this was a little kit that I found on Mini-Steam that includes the sight glass that I'm looking for, as well as some replacement gaskets. Not bad for 12 bucks, so I went ahead and I picked it up. Here I've got the original gasket that came with the steam engine, and then the two that were sent by Mini-Steam. The first one was sent in an incomplete set, so they were kind enough to send me a second set. You'll notice the thicknesses are significantly different between the three. And of course, this could cause problems if that gasket's too thick when I'm trying to fix the sight glass with the cover and the rivets. I don't know how well that's going to work aesthetically. I might be better off just going with the original gasket. Looks like it's in pretty good shape. You know, except for a little hard water I got to clean off. That looks a lot better. So. Okay, so I think I'm going to stick with the original gasket. There's really no cracks. It's not dried out or anything. It looks like it's in pretty good shape, and why not just use the original part that came with the engine and just replace the glass. And this is the rivet gun that I purchased off Amazon, and I've already been playing with this a little bit. I've never used a rivet gun before. It's kind of interesting. What I'll do is I'll demonstrate how this thing works, which is kind of neat. I've got the 3.2 millimeter fixture in there. I'm just going to experiment with one of these copper rivets, and you see they have this little stem on them. It goes inside the rivet gun as such. I'll set my iPad down. Okay, and now I'm going to try to clamp this and show you that when you do this, it works the same way. And this is interesting because it should be popping out. That stem should be popping out, and it's not. So that's kind of interesting that that didn't work. I don't want to get myself into a situation where I have this thing half installed in the boiler. So let's try this again. Okay, and I'm crimping, and it's like it's not. It's like it doesn't have enough grip on that stem. So I'm glad I checked this out or experimented with this before actually trying it in the boiler. Oh, there it goes. Okay, just to try one more experiment. Maybe it has something to do with the fact that I'm not actually using this on a piece of metal. So I drilled a 9/64 hole in this little Altoids box, and I'm going to try this again now with this actually biting on some metal and see if it makes a difference. The stem didn't break. It looks like there's something going on with this gun. It's not sealing the hole properly. That's not going to work. Let's try it again. Oh, that worked out nice. That was a little better. There it is. I don't think this is going anywhere. So I have a little more confidence doing this. Okay, so it's kind of biting right now on the stem of the rivet. I had to turn it around a few times. Here goes. Okay, and it's in. Didn't work. So it is biting the stem, but it's just not doing it effectively. Okay, I rebuilt the tool. I took it apart, put it back together again, figuring something might be wrong. I got the top rivet in. Let's see if I can demonstrate getting this bottom rivet in. So there it is. Okay, so here's my sight glass replaced. I made sure that the gasket was properly seated and that nothing's sticking out or looks like it might be leaking. I won't know until I actually put this thing under some pressure. But the sight glass, this is in there pretty well. I'd have to drill this out if I wanted to take this out again. This isn't going anywhere. It's in there pretty firm. Looks good too, I guess. I'm not in love with using rivets for this kind of work. I think screws and nuts would be a little better, but got to work with what you got. All right, well, there's not a lot more that I can do with this little engine in terms of restoration, at least within my skill level. So I'm just going to give this a shot. I'm going to fire it up and see if my instinct to go with the original gasket was a good one. And hopefully I won't see any leaks coming out of there. The pressure relief valve is working. This little port has been descaled, and the sight glass has been repaired. So let's see what happens. All right, so I've got some warmed up water here, distilled water, and I'm going to pour it in. And keep an eye on my sight glass to see how this is coming up. It's probably good enough. And no go. I can see water dripping out of the bottom of the boiler there, so I don't have a good seal. So I'm going to have to drill that out and try it again. This is a shot of the sight glass sitting on top of the gasket and the metal cover on top of that. And I think that the water's coming out of the lower end of the boiler where the metal's been bent. So maybe I need to slather some silicone on the bottom of that metal cover to seal up that area pretty well. That's all I can think of anyway. Probably do the same thing on the top. Okay, so I needed to come up with a strategy of how I'm going to apply this silicone without getting it all over the boiler or inside the boiler. So I think what I'm going to do is basically take the cover plate, mount it upside down on this little vise using 2 disposable rivets, apply the silicone around the inside of that cover, and then gently pick this up, put it on top of the boiler, and then hopefully I won't have any silicone showing up in those holes. Then I can just basically put the copper rivets in the 2 holes, taking care not to introduce any silicone into the boiler, tighten them up, and hopefully the whole thing will work. Okay, it's been 24 hours since I applied that silicone, and I left some on the razor blade that I used to clean off the cover when I installed that, just to make sure that this stuff is in fact dry, and it's got a real interesting consistency to it. It's really soft and it peels off pretty easy, so that's good. Should I want to go back and do more repairs, I don't think it'll be that difficult to work around this stuff, to scrape it off and reapply it if the first firing shows that this thing is leaking. Okay, so I warmed up some demineralized water, and we're going to fill this up, and hopefully I won't see any leaks this time. Okay, so it's been about 5 minutes now, and I don't see any leaks, so that silicone seems to have made all the difference in replacing that sight glass. I got to remember that for next time, or maybe you know, for others who are trying to restore these little engines. This stuff right here seems to be working really well. And what I'm going to do is run the steam engine now and see if it holds up under pressure. So the little engine's been lubed thoroughly everywhere where metal is making contact, and you can see that the action on this is really smooth. So I think we're ready to fire things up and see what happens. Uh-oh. I see a little drop of water right there. So looks like I'm not done yet. Well, you can see here that I still have a leak. So I've already fired stuff up. I'm not sure what I didn't do right, but I'm just gonna let this run just to see how bad this is while it's running, and then take it from there. And I can see the pressure relief valve is doing its thing, so maybe this is ready to run. Yeah, and that sure runs nice and smooth. That's beautiful. That is really cool. And yeah, I do have a few drops of water coming out of that rivet, but it's not too bad. The steam engine. For the purposes of what I wanted to test today, I'd say this has been pretty successful. I have more work to do though. I do think I want to drill those rivets out and write that sight glass cover. That kind of bothers me a little. But overall, I think it did really well. And it looks like a little bit of water leaking out of the sight glass cover right there, out of those rivets, isn't a big deal because the pressure is actually being relieved out of that little port right there. So seems like I could just leave it the way it is for the purposes of building my little steamboat. It should be okay. Having gotten this restoration to this point, I thought I'd share some of the lessons that I learned trying to put this together. And the first thing is eBay seems to be a pretty good resource for these used steam engines, but be prepared to do some restoration work. Probably the most common thing I suspect people will find is scaling from the original owners using hard water in these steam engines. I personally have not really quite figured out how to descale these thoroughly. I'm going to do a little bit more research, but that can certainly be an issue with a used engine. The next thing is that here in the US, parts really aren't that easy to find. Ministeam does stock steam engines and parts to service the same, but I was surprised that they didn't carry the copper rivets for these particular engines. So I had to do a lot of research. I tried finding rivet distributors here in the US. Nobody had exactly what I needed for this engine, and eventually I had to purchase it from a seller on eBay. Also pay attention to the measurements of whatever you purchase online. I noticed that the sight glass gasket that I received should be about 1.65 millimeters compared to the original. I received two from the same retailer, and they were both significantly different in size. So it's just something to be aware of. And the other thing I noticed is that many retailers do not ship overseas. Your best bet for finding one that does is just to filter accordingly on eBay. Next, for this particular steam engine, you can use here in the US a 1/8 drill bit to hollow out those rivets and get them removed. Just approach it very slowly and delicately. On that note, rivet guns, at least in my experience, has been that they're not the easiest tool to use, especially when you're working with something delicate like this. I'm not sure if it's because of my lack of experience using rivet guns or if it was a quality issue with the particular gun that I purchased. If I were to do this again, I'd probably go with a higher quality rivet gun. With respect to any seals that you're trying to make around metal that's been fatigued or bent, I think that using high temperature silicone will really help improve the seals around those rivets and create a better gasket for high pressure. And also pay attention to sight glass cover orientation. While I was doing this, I got distracted with the silicone. I was trying to make sure that I didn't get anything inside the boiler. And as a result of that distraction, I actually placed it on the boiler upside down, which doesn't really impact performance, but certainly it's something that bothers me, and I'm going to go back and fix that at a future date. Maybe put a little bit more silicone under that cover to make sure that it doesn't leak. But just something to keep in mind. And finally, this takes a lot of patience. I thought I'd have this thing fixed in about 2 weeks. It took me over a month of researching parts, ordering from overseas, waiting for them to come in, learning how to use tools, doing research on how to get this thing restored, which is really the reason why I put this video together for other people who are trying to do this kind of work and are like me, have never done this before and are kind of winging it. Here's a resource that summarizes some of the things that worked for me and some of the mistakes I made, and I hope that this is useful for you. Please consider subscribing for updates. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.